gospel reading for today comes from the gospel according to John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. Hear the word of the Lord. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed through him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night's coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And when he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is not this the same man that used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been formerly blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." And some of the Pharisees said, "This man, not from God, because he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "Well, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." And he said, "He's a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" And his parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether this man is a sinner. One thing I do know, that I was blind, now I see." And they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us? And they drove him out. Now Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, surely we are not blind, are we? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin, but now that you say, we see, your sin remains. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. Last week, I preached the sermon on Jesus talking to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, and getting the drink of water. And the sermon revolved around the fact that there were some things separating Jesus and the woman, and then there were some things that they had in common. Some things separating them were race. Jesus was Jewish. He was Samaritan, which was a mix of Israelite with Assyrian and some other races. Religion, Jewish Israelite religion was different from Samaritan. And, of course, gender. Here was a man who dares to speak to a woman, which sounds silly to us now, but back in the day, big deal. It was a big deal. So these are differences that they had, but they met where? At the well of Jacob, their common ancestor. They shared what? Water, because they both drank water. So Jesus builds on their commonalities. And the whole thrust of last week's message was about this. It was about how do you build those bridges? How do you do that? How do you find yourself in the world and then build those bridges? Well, after the sermon, one of you came to me and said, okay, that's great, but how? How do you do that? I want to hear more about this. And I said, so you want a sequel? You want a Wrath of Khan? Yes, I want a sequel. So this is going to be a sequel to that. Okay? So here we have a story that, conveniently for me, it's easy to make a sequel out of because it's very similar in some ways. This time, the person in question, the person at the center of the controversy, is not a person who is a Samaritan, and it's not a woman. It's a Jewish man, but he falls into another category, which is disabled. Okay, and when you think about categories of people who are discriminated against, that's probably not the first one that comes to your mind, but I promise you it's a big one. In fact, to this day, at Louisiana State University, there are buildings, tall buildings, that people have to go to class in that don't have any handicap access because they're historic landmark buildings. And so I know of one teacher who had to teach a person there in a wheelchair, and they had to go outside and find someplace outside, no matter how hot it was, no matter how what, because people with wheelchairs just couldn't get in there. And it was important enough to them to keep the building pristine than to let the students in to study. So this is a real thing today, too. I want to talk about the way that we are made as people, because the gospel is made to interact with us and built to interact with us at the level where we are. So when we first start organizing together as a society, as God's people, as any people, we first come up with some basic rules to govern ourselves. We have to. And we see a lot of these built into the Ten Commandments, right? So you got your do not lie, do not steal, do not kill. Actually, lie is don't bear false witness. Don't accuse somebody in court of something that you didn't actually see them do. Don't steal, don't kill, don't covet. These are some pretty baseline things to have human society. And we are a tribal people. We are a herd animal. Jesus compares us to sheep because sheep go in a herd. And we are built, and if you ever wonder, if you ever think, no, we are lone rangers. We are built to be alone and by ourselves. Some people believe this. My grandfather believes this. My father's father, who lives as a hermit out in the middle of nowhere in a pile of sticks he calls a house. He's a very strange man, and he likes that existence. But if you ever wonder, are humans really a herd animal? That little hollering critter over there will teach you very quickly. When you're born, if you don't have people to take care of you, you will die. Not like a deer, not like a fawn that's born and then walking around, or a foal or something, that pretty soon they can get up and go. Not so with us. We have to have each other to survive. If we don't have people from birth, we die. This is how we're built. This is how we're made to be. So these laws make sense. Don't kill, don't steal, right? Okay, that's good. That's your first layer of laws. This is the natural good of tribal creatures. But then, so we get comfortable with that one. We build another layer on top of that one. We as humans, wherever we're at. And this, in the Jewish context, turns out to be beyond the tribal good. Now we have laws about the natural good. They learned from crop rotation that sometimes you need to let the ground lie fallow for it to become fertile again. So every 7th year, the field that had been growing crops, they would leave alone to regenerate and then come back. Well, it makes sense to apply this to life too, right? 7-day weeks. And the last week is a holy week of rest. The last day of the week, the Sabbath. So rest one day, work 6 days, rest one day, just as the natural world does. Once again, our laws are built in harmony with our tribal nature, and then built in harmony with nature itself. Okay, this is all good. Then we have a third layer of law we build on top of that layer of law. And this one has to do with commerce, equal exchange. You have to have society to have that, right? Buying and selling. And so they think, if we want to keep the lightning god or the thunder god or the earthquake god or the fire god to leave us alone, then we've got to pay him off. We've got to buy him off like a mob boss. So what we'll do is we'll take the best of our stuff and we'll sacrifice it. And that smoke will go up and we'll make that god leave us alone. And we'll try it until it works, and then we'll make laws and priesthoods around that process. This is what people all over the world did. Okay? Equivalent exchange. If you want to get something from God or one of the gods, or however you think about this, then you've got to pay for it with something, like a sacrifice. You've got to give up something good to you. So then we get a whole bunch of laws around rituals and everything. And that's a law built on top of another layer that's built on top of another layer that's built on top of who we really are. So these layers of law build up over time. And then they get codified, and this becomes the law that rules the land. By the time that the first 5 books of the Bible are compiled together, there were 613 discrete laws, up from 10. You may remember that originally there were 10 big ones. By the time we get to the end of that book, we find 603 more added on there, of all shapes, flavors, and sizes. As if that were not enough. I mentioned last week that when the Jews were taken off into Babylon, they eventually came back after the Persians came in, and they came back and rebuilt their place. But here's the deal. It was 70 years later. Most of the Jews alive had been born in Babylon by this time. And so a lot of them stayed behind because that was where their life was. Well, fast forward to just before the time of Jesus, you got one person who is saying in Israel, named Shammai, and he's saying, here's the way things go. Here's the way the tradition has always been. It's unwritten rules. Here's our unwritten rules, all the way back from Moses, surely. And then you got somebody come from Babylonia named Hillel, and Babylonia, and he comes over, and he said, no, that's how you guys do it here, but you got it wrong. Here's the real way that you should do things. And they argued and fought about it until there is a set of commentaries called the Talmud, no joke, that long, sitting on my shelf in my office. It's all about all these little nitpicky questions. And all this was built up to the level of, this is the law you have to go with. So when you got a law that convoluted and that nasty, it is so easy to break it. And when you have laws that are easy to break, you have groups of people who get together who make it their business to find the people who they think are breaking the rules, to shame them for breaking the rules, and to say, how glad I am that I am not you. This is the way human society works. I don't want to suggest that that happens in the church. I want to insist that that happens in the church, as well as every other. Here's where we're at in the story, though, okay? The Pharisees are one such group of these people. They live at the level of that ritual law. That's what matters most to them, that you cross all your T's and dot all your I's. And they cannot imagine that a person would suffer or go through anything horrible if they hadn't missed one of those T's. And when you make your law that big and nasty, it's easy to try and find a place and say, oh, well, this must be it. Job's friends did the same thing back in the day. They kept trying to nail him down on, oh, you did this wrong. Oh, you must have done that wrong. Oh, come on, man, you must have done something wrong. Because they cannot conceive of a world where this law that they have come up with of balances is not the final word. So this is where the Pharisees live. They feel like they are the in crowd, and they maintain their status as the in crowd by pointing around everybody else and saying, you're in the out crowd. This is nothing, my friends, but high school shenanigans. Every one of us in here who has been to school at any level have witnessed these shenanigans and probably taken part in these shenanigans. The difference is we have the opportunity as we grow to grow out of these shenanigans and become adults. Not everyone does. Some people really grab onto that and ride it hard. Have you guys seen Napoleon Dynamite? If you haven't seen Napoleon Dynamite by now, you need to. Well, I don't know if you even do need to by now. It may be past its prime. But there's a character in this movie, Napoleon Dynamite, and he keeps talking about how he was a big football star back in the 80s in high school. You know, and he's like, man, if Coach would have just put me in that one game, man, it would have been different for me, man. I'd be having a hot tub and my soulmate. Yeah. And all I can think about is, man, 84. Put me back in the game. Put me in 84. He's trapped. He's trapped in that mindset. It's not that bad a movie. Don't complain. You haven't even seen it. So he's trapped into these high school shenanigans, and this will do that. So last week, the out group was another race, another religion, another gender. This week, it is disabled, but not just disabled. There's something else at stake here. So I talked to you just a moment about the Pharisees, and they have all these opinions, and then there's some of them that are Hillel guys, and some of them that are Shammai guys. Well, this is the right way to do it. No, that's the right way to do it. No, you should light the candles on Wednesdays. No, you light the candles on Fridays, you dummy. All this kind of stuff going on. Here you got this blind guy. He's never been able to read the Bible. Blind. He's never been able to read the scrolls in the synagogue. He never was able to study the Torah the way that most people did back then, okay? So he did not know. He was Joe the plumber. If you want an example that would have been relevant 2.5 years ago, he's a Joe the plumber of the people. He's just a regular Joe, non-churched, doesn't have a dog in the race or in the hunt when it comes to this kind of thing. So imagine that instead of Jesus coming along and finding this guy, that it was one of the Pharisees that we're telling the story about. So the Pharisee comes by, and they see this person, and the Pharisee's disciples say to him, Pharisee, Master, who sinned, this man or his parents, that caused him to be born blind? I don't know the Talmud well enough to tell you what the answer would have been, but I can tell you that he would have had a very detailed answer. It would have sounded something like, well, it must have been his parents, and it could have happened before they were married or after they were married. It probably involved something with the sacrificial cult. They didn't make the right sacrifice at the right time, or if they did, it wasn't enough of the sacrifice. Maybe they sacrificed a dove where it should have been a goat, or it could be that they were supposed to have a bull and they had the goat. One of those things happened that caused an imbalance, and the penalty for this breaking of the law is an equal and opposite reaction, which is the blindness of the son. Boom, it makes sense, and the Pharisee would have gone home and rested easy, knowing that he had once again, like Clarissa, explained it all. And everyone would know that God is just, there are no unanswered questions in life, and there's no reason to think that anything more might be going on than you've already figured out. That would be the Pharisees' response. He's just like Job's friends. He is very smart and learned and knows all about the law, but at the end of the day, he is as dumb as a bag of hammers. And that is not enough. So now, let's come back into reality. It wasn't the Pharisee that came up to this guy. It was Jesus. And so Jesus comes up, and his disciples say, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus, just like God does to Job at the end of Job, Jesus says to them, "I'm going to reject your question. It's a false question. Neither he or his parents' sin are responsible for him being blind. I know that's how it seems. I know that's how the Pharisees have taught you. This is not what's going on." Instead of even dealing with this question straight on, what I'm going to say is, watch this. Watch this. You want a ritual? You want something dignified and solemn? Check it out. Right in the mud. How's this for dignified and solemn, my friends? Takes that finger, mixes it all up in with the mud, and comes up with a big gooping hunk of it. And says, "Come here, buddy. Come here." He can't see. He doesn't know what's going to happen. So he's like, "Sure." Right on the eyeballs. Nasty. Gross. And it matters that it's nasty and gross. This is part of the point, actually, so stick with me. And then he says, "Okay, now you've been nastified. Time for you to go wash that off in the pool of Siloam." Now, the text tells us, let me step back for a minute. The text tells us, in parentheses, it says, the word Siloam means sent. There are thousands of words in here that the text does not take the time to stop and say, and here's what that word means. So maybe it matters that Siloam means sent. It matters enough that the writer stops and says, they need to know in case they don't know Hebrew. That's what this means. Sent. Jesus has been sent into the world. And Jesus is sending this guy to the pool, but he's also sending him somewhere else the dude doesn't even know about yet. Stick with me. We'll get there. Okay? So, Jesus could have stood apart. This is Jesus Christ. Could Jesus have simply done a little Irish jig and made the guy see again? Sure. Sure. But he doesn't do that. He gets nasty. He gets gross. He gets dirty. He gets down to where the guy is. This guy sits on the ground and begs all day. He's covered in dirt. This guy gets in the dirt. Jesus gets in the dirt and says, "Here we are in the dirt together. And here's what we're going to do." This is very different than standing apart. This is getting right in there. And this dude that he is healing, he does not know theology from astrology from bracketology. Okay? He never been to school. He was blind. He had no idea about all these theological questions. If you would have asked him some of even the more basic questions, this kind of stuff that we just talked about on our confirmation retreat this weekend, he would have had no idea what to tell you. He doesn't know. When the Pharisees confront him about this and they want theological answers and an accounting for how this happened on the Sabbath, he has no idea. He says, "Look, dude, I have no idea. I have no idea. All I know is one thing. I used to be blind, now I see. Hey, that's all I know. And that's all I have to go on." All he knows is that he is going to trust the person who came into the dirt with him and helped him out and healed him. That's all he needs to know. He doesn't need to understand the intricacies of biblical Hebrew and New Testament Greek. He doesn't need to know how to come up with ways to talk about the Trinity. He doesn't need to know any of that stuff. He just says, "I trust this guy. He came and helped me." That's very basic. That's cutting through the law. That's cutting through all those layers that the Pharisees want to talk about. And he says, "Okay, you've got this law and that law and this ritual and sacrifice that goat on that day. All I know is this dude came and helped me out. Beat that. Beat it, if you can." And that is when they got angry with him. So, the question is, how? Same question. This is the question that came to me after the last week's sermon. How do you get into the dirt? How do you cross that bridge? How do you find the well of Jacob? How does this happen? Okay, so basically, I'm going to lay out for you real briefly what my whole philosophy / theology / bracketology of mission in the world is. Okay? It starts, just like build the onion, start at the beginning. The first thing you do before you say to yourself, that's someone who needs to come to my church. Think about the way that question is phrased. Before you say, that's someone I need to make a target. That's someone that I need to be a good influence in their life. Before any of that comes into your mind, that's someone who needs a friend. A real friend. Not a friend with an ulterior motive. Just a friend. That's someone who needs to have a relationship with somebody. Somebody who doesn't abuse them. Somebody who doesn't degrade them. Somebody who doesn't tear them down. Somebody who helps them begin slowly to understand what a beautiful person they are, created in God's image. Not even using those words, because God language, let me tell you, is scary, because so many people have used it to tell others that they're going to burn in hell forever. God language is scary. You've got to ease your way into that stuff. What you don't have to ease your way into, just plain friendship. It doesn't have to be centered on the Bible or Scripture at the beginning, okay? And let me give you, and then from there, you build this relationship of trust. This is somebody I can count on. This is somebody, if I'm having a really hard time, this is somebody who will listen to me talk. This is somebody who, if I need to move furniture, they'll come over and do it. This is somebody, if I really need to borrow their truck, they'll let me, okay? That's where this starts. This is somebody who, if they were able to heal me with mud in the eyeballs, I know they'd do it. That's where you start. And then, what happens when this guy goes out? He doesn't have to go and tell people about this person that healed him. Other people look and say, this guy was blind and now he sees. They come to him. Jesus had sent him incognito. Sent him out into the world healed. And just that by being healed so brashly and boldly, he didn't have to go and stage an event. He didn't have to set up a big thing in the park with a bunch of speakers and make sure that everybody was going to be coming by. All he had to do was be himself and honest, and people came to him and said, dude, I don't know what you're doing, I don't know what you've got, but I needs me some of that. That's the way it's supposed to go. That's really the way it's supposed to go. So, you build the relationship, then you share what's authentically going on with you, and then people realize that there's something powerful there inside a shell and inside a vocabulary. Words like God and church no longer are as hurtful, and they can have new meanings and be reborn for them. But you have to start at the beginning. Don't jump ahead. Start at the beginning. So there's, in a nutshell, there's nowhere you go that you're not fit to do ministry. Starting with relationship building. There is nothing you can do that is not fit to be part of your ministry. And there is no one you meet whom you are not fit or who is not fit to be a part of your ministry in the world together. And let me give you just one example. I've alluded to this a couple of times, and I mentioned on Facebook quite a bit. One of my favorite things to do right now, a big hobby of mine, is I play a game called Dungeons & Dragons, which in the 1980s some people thought was devil worship. A quick rule about how to tell if you're worshiping the devil is ask yourself one question. Am I worshiping the devil? If the answer is no, then you're not worshiping the devil. So that's just a good rule of thumb. And that's what I applied. And so every Tuesday I have some friends over. Some of them are members of the church. Some of them are not. And we play this game. It's a little adventure game. You move little pieces on a map and roll dice to see if you hit the goblin or whatever. Okay? Has nothing to do on the face of it with the gospel, with Christ, with hymns. It does have to do with relationship building, friendship, enjoying your time together, talking with each other, getting to know each other. That's what it is about. And that is a foundation for ministry. Such that there's a store in Sherwood where I get some of my equipment for the game, just little pieces and stuff. And I was in there one day. I'd been visiting somebody in the hospital in Sherwood, and I had on my clerical collar, which I sometimes wear to hospitals. And so while I was there, I said, well, I'm going to stop by the store. So I stopped by the store. I go in there. People who frequent gaming stores are often very leery of Christians because Christians have told them for so long that they're going to go to hell and that they are devil worshiping when in fact they're just trying to play a game. So I'm there and I'm wearing my collar, and I go in there and I'm like, shouldn't have worn the collar. This is going to turn some people off. They're going to think that I've come in here to set up with a bullhorn and say, Jesus is telling you to leave your Dungeons and Dragons behind. I didn't have a bullhorn. That's a thought. So I'm looking through some of the stuff, and somebody talks to me, and he's like, "So are you a minister?" And I was like, "I'm a level 7 cleric." Because this is my 7th year of full-time, or level 6. This is my 6th year of full-time ministry. And cleric is one of the words in the game, which I'm technically a Christian cleric. So I was like, yeah, I'm a level 6 cleric. Guy laughed, saw that I wasn't going to beat him over the head with the Bible, and we started talking. And a real relationship started to happen there, which is the core. It's like when the sand gets into the oyster, and slowly it builds layers over it until it turns into a pearl. Well, that was the piece of sand that got in there. The pearl started to grow. Where? At a gaming shop in Sherwood, Arkansas. Not in a coliseum or a convention center or a church house or a family life center. Those things are all great, but they're not the be-all, end-all, see? I found myself in this place because I wanted to look at the games. That was a place for ministry. You find yourself going to deer camp. I don't go to deer camp. You guys grow your beards in November. I grow my beard in Lent. You guys go to deer camp. Man, that's a place. That's a place. This Christian lodge where we went for our confirmation retreat used to be a duck lodge, and somebody had the idea, this is a place where relationships build and happen. Why not just be explicit and give it to Christ? But even before that had happened, if it was just being used as a lodge, just being used as a place where people gather together, any place you're getting together to do something social, that's a place to build relationships. That's a place that ministry can advance. Okay? But you can't stand apart and say, I'm only going to do the things that I want to do. I'm only going to live in this little corner of the universe. Because there's a whole bunch of corners out there. And some of them are in the mud. And some of them are in the dirt. And some of them you got to prove you are who you are by being willing to hork a big loogie into the mud and go forward. Okay? I don't know if that clears anything up or not, but I want to give you a text back question right now. For 3 minutes, talk about this. Text them in if you got them. And here's the question. Be creative. Don't just think here about where are places that I have gone in the past or I do commonly go. Be creative and think of some zany places that you could do this kind of real ministry. I gave you the example of a gaming shop in Sherwood, Arkansas. That is by far from the zaniest answer that we can get. I want to hear what you got. So take 3 minutes, talk about it, come up with something mind-bending, text it in. Go. We got some great answers coming in. Keep those answers coming in. The bottom line of the whole thing is that ministry flows through friendships. It always flows through friendships, relationships, building those encounters. The blind man's neighbors come and ask him about his Jesus. He doesn't have to go and put up a billboard. They come and ask him because they just see it. They just see it and they want to know. And this is a guy they feel like they know who he is. So here's the tragic part. His parents are God-fearing. Actually strike that. They're church-fearing. They're afraid of what the people in the church will say. And so when people come and ask him about their son who's living differently than they would like him to, they don't stand up. They're afraid of the church. They don't stand up and say, he's free to do as he pleases. Yes, he is, in fact, seeing now that he's blind, and I'm not going to let you take that away. Instead, they say, you ask him, let him bear the punishment of this thing. Let him bear the trouble that comes from this. His own parents, man. this is where they're coming from. So you got to miss out on something in life. You can't always get what you want. You can either miss out on the approval of hypocrites, or you can miss out on God in building relationships like these in places that you'd never expect. And the question boils right down to, which one are you more afraid of? In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.